Hello, welcome to this session of Words Fest, where we're going to be hearing from David Barrick and Kathryn Mockler. It says up there in conversation with, I'll try to say as little as possible and let them do the reading and the talking. But I will say a little bit about them, introducing them in the traditional kind of way, and then I'll ask them one question, and then they're both going to read for 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have a conversation after that. So the first question I'd like to ask, has anybody read either or both of Anecdotes and Nightlight? There are a few people who have at least read parts of those. If you have, you might know everything you need to know by way of introduction to David and Kathryn, but in the traditional way, here's some details. Kathryn does a little bit of everything. She's a writer, screenwriter, experimental filmmaker, editor, publisher. She seems to have moved, at least as I've known her career, from screenwriting and filmmaking into poetry, with books like The Purpose Pitch and The Saddest Place on Earth, and then into editing and publishing, then into experimental film. Her films have screened at places like TIFF and the Palm Springs Film Festival, and now she's the author of this short story collection, Anecdotes. I want to say, too, just because of my role I am at Western, that Kathryn was instrumental in the development of the creative writing program at Western, but sadly, she now teaches at the University of Victoria instead. David, on the other hand, is a poet who has published the chapbooks Incubation Chamber and Two Dreams, Stratford, and The Copyist. He's been published otherwise, well, I would say just about everywhere. I haven't seen his poetry on the side of a bus yet, but I expect that might be coming. The book that he's talking about today, Nightlight, is his first book-length collection. He's also the director of Antler River Poetry, a reading series right here in London, which many of you probably know. And he also teaches at Western, where he is a cornerstone of our creative writing program. I think both David and Kathryn exemplify the idea of writing existing in a community. And one of the great pleasures of my professional life, because I also teach at Western, is seeing younger generations of writers, because of where I am primarily from Western, publishing and thriving, really because of Kathryn and David. And the really neat thing about that is that some of them might especially not know who Kathryn even is, but they are benefiting from what Kathryn was able to do while she was at Western with us. If you've read the books that we're going to be hearing about today, you'll know this is true. If the world had more Kathryns and Davids in it, it would be a much better place. However, it would be a weirder place, a more uncanny place, and a more uncertain and disturbing place. Definitely better, but you definitely have to, be careful in the way you looked at it if there were more of them. So I'm going to ask one question to start before they read, and this is kind of a basic thing about formats. So these are the books. So this is Anecdotes, and you'll notice probably, if you haven't seen it, quite an arresting cover. You're not soon going to forget that. And the same is true of Nightlight and its disturbing and unforgettable cover. These books are from Palimpsest Press and Book Hug Press, small presses, and beautiful artifacts. I mean, just to hold one is to say and to feel that these are good books. So the first question I want to ask the two of you, because I know I've seen a lot of your work and I've seen where it's been published. So the first question is, I know you publish a lot online, and obviously you have the chapbooks, you have the books. How do you feel about the relationship between the things that you do online and the things that appear in print? Is one or the other more satisfying, or how do you see the relationship between those things?
That's a great question. And I think there is something deeply satisfying about having a print object that you can hold in your hands and bring to readings and share with an audience. But one thing that I love about digital publications is the speed of them, and the way that they can pop up and be economical. And oftentimes I've submitted to those journals because I see people who I admire take the initiative to start something like that. And it's sort of a pleasure to see my work with the work of other poets that I admire in that context. And I'd say one great example of that is actually the Watch Your Head journal that Kathryn Mockler spearheaded. Wonderful digital publication.
And you were a contributor as well. So you can find David's poems on there. Yeah, I've run multiple online literary journals, so obviously I'm kind of into them. But I also, partly the speed, and as terms of publishing my own work, I really like it when people can read the work, and most online journals are free. And the sad truth about some in-print only journals is people don't read the work, except for maybe the other people who are in it and a few subscribers, which sounds sort of bleak, but it's kind of true. So if you want people to read your work and you can easily share it on social media, then it as a writer, it's satisfying because people can read it, but then that also means that print journals aren't being supported in the way that they should as well. As for book publications, people are, seem to be buying books, and people seem to be really into books again. I was one of those people who couldn't read during the first years of the pandemic, and I'm on TikTok now, and now I'm getting a bit of a book fetish. So I'm really excited about the physicality of it as well. Thanks.
Excellent. Okay, so they're going to read for about 10 minutes each, and David is going to start. And just because of the difficulty of holding a microphone and reading from a book, they're going to come up.
I think I'll take my mask off just for the reading. Thank you so much for that introduction, Mike. And it is such a pleasure to be reading with Kathryn today. I'm going to start with a few poems from my book, Nightlight, which is a book that features dream logic poems, surrealism as a way of exploring imagination and creativity, and how that can be a positive thing, but how it can also be tied up in anxiety. So I'm going to start with just a couple of poems from the long middle sequence, which is like an extended weird dream with little scenes that are in a sequence of 12. And I'm just going to read 3 of those. The longer poem's title is REM. I see my brother on the bus. He tells me he lives in Florida now. Tells me there they eat fruits that only look like oranges. There, Mickey Mouse's head is a honeycomb. There, you can open up drawers and your lost keys appear for a small monthly fee. His chin is impressive. My brother would make a good Gregory Peck. I want to hear what he thinks of my latest invention, but he's already shaking my hand. Sorry, man, I got a train. A whistle blows as we walk beside clattering boxcars. Catch up soon, he says, swinging onto the caboose. But hey, you got something on your chin there. I dab it. Ice cream. I'm holding an empty cone. Ice cream all over the cobblestones. I try to scrape it up as twilight sets in, fingers gathering glimmering semi-liquid from grout and gravel. A distant whistle blows and blows. Welcome to my basement genetics lab. Here are the goggles, here are the rubber gloves, the petri dishes, the chemical tubs, a green haze laced with pine sol. I've engineered colorful edibles, super dense and tasteless, a thick fibrous chomp of neon lettuce. Problem is where to store them. The fridge is brimming. Bedrooms are full, waist deep. We're using the pink ones as attic insulation. I look for my wife. She's sitting on the back deck, whiffing a brandy snifter full of vinyl erasers. Her hair drawn into braids, a small brown tuft sticking up. She looks out across the Arctic tundra. There, she says, pointing. There. Wherever she points, a yellow flame appears. Another one. Her fingers make the moon dim. Silent, I sit next to her. and let evening come to us. We wake in a hayfield, plastic picnic cloth covered in dewdrops, winking at golden wind-rustled stalks. Everything reflects everything else. Grass smells of your hair smells of pine cones, my hands smell of bird nests smell of our faces. A violet haze blurs and clings to our clothes. Let's get up and walk it through the forest, into our neighborhood. It will linger on all the people we pass. It will disrobe the town. I want to read this next poem because the tone almost feels like an homage in some ways to Kathryn's work. So I feel like there's a connection there. This is called Long Range Forecast. The sky is falling and so am I. We've been falling together for a long time now. Other things are falling too. A potted fern, a lawnmower, a cow, newlyweds. Everyone seems pretty calm about it, as if we're fully committed to where we're going. The sky whiffles along our limbs, a refreshing turbulence. The newlyweds hold hands, their formal attire rippling like parachutes, and the lawnmower purrs. Really, it's as if we're all just floating in midair. Could we live here? I close my eyes and make my house appear. I open the door, inviting others in for a continental breakfast. I flip on the coffee maker, snap linen over the kitchen table, set the fern on the windowsill. Outside, the cow is still falling, spinning end over end, losing her milk, mooing softly, a storybook sound. Sleeping cure. It starts snowing in your sleep, snowing for days in the span of 1 minute, and you hear the rafters groan with all that powder, the window panes straining, about to burst outwards. But your eyes hold it back, hold the peace, hold the world together as you pat the empty bed beside you, feel the rumpled sheets and nightgown that held your wife, who must be in the kitchen downstairs frying eggs, her hair tied back, warming her hands over the oil-spitting pan or shoveling snow off the roof to ease the rafters, thumping down in the bushes like a body below sooty clouds, falling, freezing, chiming against cold sidewalks. Your eyelids holding back the light outside, flash bomb bright, as your wife calls from the kitchen, shaking the pill bottle, saying, "Wake up. Look at how the world changes when you open your eyes. Wake up. This is your medicine, whether you take it or not." Since we're in Museum London, I'm going to read a poem it's an ekphrastic piece about Mary Pratt's painting from 1983 titled Fish Head and Steel Sink. And I wanted to show you the pictures, so the only place I could find it was actually on the cover of this book, Active Pass, which, interestingly enough, is written by Jane Monroe, who's at this festival giving a workshop this afternoon, which, if you're interested in writing poetry, you should check it out. You should come out at 3 o'clock. I'm sure that there's still a couple of seats left. But this is the painting by Mary Pratt. Or, yes, Mary Pratt. And here's my poem about the painting. Sorry, that's really awkward. I can do two things at once. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Kathryn. This is called Recipe. He almost made it. Almost reached the sound of funneling rapids, sputtering plunk and gargle of a deep drain pipe's exit, 4 holes with no key. The kitchen happens above him somewhere. Aroma of lemon sauce, beets, and broccoli. Dinner voices titter out, tinny and nimble vibrations along tankered walls of oily steel. Water droplets squint the blue ceiling back at itself. This is what's left. A pink flesh ruff, a gentle ridge of jaw swallowing at the steel basin. All kinesthetics gone, only an orange streak afterimage.
Still, this linseed sunset eye will not dissolve in broth, stock, gumbo, or stew. There is no recipe for this catch in the throat, for a bright laurel of fish bones. I think I'll just, I had two more poems, if that's okay. They're new ones. Yesterday was the 69th anniversary of the release of the first Godzilla film in 1954. So I'm gonna read you a Godzilla poem. There have been a lot of poets who've written Godzilla poems recently, weirdly. The poet Michael Pryor wrote one in 2013 that was awesome about Godzilla and Mothra. Julian Day published one a little while ago. And also a poet who I really enjoy, David Lee, published a poem about the most recent iteration of Godzilla, legendary Godzilla from the most recent Universal films. He published a poem about that Godzilla, celebrating him as sort of a hero, and it was a fantastic piece. And I sort of took a cue from David Lee and wrote this poem about Shin Godzilla. And Shin Godzilla, this was a movie that came out in 2016. And what I loved about it is that it sort of brought back the scariness of Godzilla, where it returned to 1954 really, because that original film was pretty dark. It wasn't sort of funny and goofy and campy. It was focused on the fallout of the aftermath of World War II and nuclear contamination. That was the theme of the film. And Godzilla, I can imagine, would have been very scary, even though he's a rubber suit. I can imagine in 1954 he would be very scary. And in Shin Godzilla, they sort of brought that back. And the creature goes through all these weird mutations, starting as just sort of like this worm-like tail, and then evolving into more strange and horrifying forms. And I felt like there was a parallel to contemporary society, and just that feeling of watching things as they sort of spiral out of control. So this is the poem. Shin Godzilla thrashes across my laptop screen, healing like an oil tanker off Tokyo Bay, and growing thick gristle, smoked meat gills leaking, washing highways, tires bursting in a low boil of blood. It pains me to see his pain emanating in this petrochemical flood, igniting from all pores, atomic mirror ball dicing fighter jets, bisecting skyscrapers. For every crisis, there is a board meeting. Folded hands, fine suits, appalled faces. This is how it must have felt to watch his immolations in 1954, how it feels to doom scroll endless, unequal, and opposite reactions. The feed is feverish these days, chaotic ballet cascading beyond my window frame. I wish to slow it down, to sleep, to freeze this mitosis at the tip of whatever is coming next. And I don't want to leave you in that dark place. So this is a poem about making it through quarantine and the pandemic by watching a lot of Bob Ross's The Joy of Painting. It's called Bob Ross Beats the Devil. Bob Ross beats the devil out of that brush. Wet on wet, fingers rinsed and lemon fresh, keeping smudges off the skyline. I'd like that mellow voice to narrate my taxes, navigate these bills. Cat needs dental work again, non-deductible. Bob rescued squirrels and raccoons, let birds land in his hair, assembled a backyard sanctuary, snuffed out the health spark of moods in a 30-minute landscape, blooming from ashtray to Eden. I take a break and binge Netflix, his risky brushstrokes. I'm sure he's ruined it each time he adds another long black line that morphs into a crisp pine. Mountain peaks receding as the forest grows lush and pasto thick. And then a log cabin that has no windows, but might soon.
Can you hear me okay? It's really interesting to read here because this is a bit like one of those dreams where everyone from different parts of your life are in it. There are a lot of a lot of people I really care about in this room who I don't get to see very often. Cherished colleagues, train buddies, former students, dear friends from public school and high school. Of course, my family, my in-laws, my mom, my husband, my drinking buddy, former student and colleague, another former student and friend. It's just really nice to read in your home city. It's really a very unusual experience. So thank you all for coming. I was so thrilled when I found out David and I were reading together and that Michael was going to be hosting us. So I'm really happy to be here, and thanks to Josh and everyone at Words Fest. This is a treat. Please forgive me my rage. Lots of this book was written while I was compiling an anthology with other editors on the climate crisis in 2020. So while there was a pandemic, I was reading thousands of climate poems. And then this book was sort of put together and written. So let's play oil slick. Two children are playing together in a schoolyard. A, let's play oil slick. B, I get to be the bird and you can be the rescuer. A, I want to be the bird. Now wash my hair. You washed my hair. You were the bird last time. I'm not playing unless I get to play the character I want. Why don't you be the bird and I'll be the sea otter? Who will rescue us? Nobody. It's anticipation that's keeping me alive. If you're cold, take off your sweater and come inside. And if you need a drink, get it yourself from the beer fridge. I'm not the host. I'm just sitting here waiting to see what's going to happen next. It's exciting, even if on the surface everything looks ordinary. The water glasses next to the table, the throw pillows on the green couch, the wind rustling the leaves in the trees while someone throws a lit cigarette into the street. In a moment, it might rain or maybe not, but it doesn't matter because it's anticipation that's keeping me alive. Yesterday, a snail crossed my path on the sidewalk. I picked her up and put her in the garden so she wouldn't get crushed by my foot when she hadn't even made it to the halfway mark of her journey. But the snail's plight wasn't any of my business, but I have a savior complex. I don't think she appreciated my intervention because she crawled into her house and didn't come out. Where are you in your journey? And what would make you retreat into your shell? I'm in the blue void, but something will happen eventually. I just know it. I'm mostly reading flash pieces, but there are normal-sized stories in here as well. But today I'm reading the flash. Walking. I'll walk with my head down because I hate myself. And you'll walk with your eyes on the phone because you hate everyone else. And maybe we'll bump into each other on the sidewalk. You know what's great? This is another play. Two friends are sitting in a coffee shop drinking hot drinks. The world is a terrible place, but you know what's great about it? What? I don't care anymore. Don't you think you're being selfish? Don't you think you're being rude? No, I think I'm just being like everyone else. Is it wise to be like everyone else? Yes, instead of getting worked up and losing sleep, I'm watching events unfold like I'm in a movie theater, but sitting far away from the front row. Can you order popcorn? I can order all the popcorn I want and some red licorice. And you know what? What? The seats are very comfortable and no one blocks my view, not even the man with the oversized head who claims to know how the film will end. Does the film make anyone cry? No, no one is crying. Why not? Isn't it a sad story? Yes, it's a very sad story because everyone still thinks it's happening to someone else while it's happening to them. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the maxi pad, which I'm very fond of, and I'm going to read a story set in London, Victoria Park. So I had a couple period stories. I'd never really written about my period, but before, I don't know why. Well, actually, yeah, I know why, but anyways, I never did. And so I wrote one, and my editor, Malcolm Sutton, also designed the book and the cover illustration. And he'd been working. We worked very closely on this book, and he came up with this cover design, and sort of jumped hierarchy and sent it to me. And of course, I burst into tears, and I loved it because it's funny, but it also is a symbol of shame. And then I think some of the marketing people didn't really like it, and I sort of flipped out. Poor everybody having to be on the other end of me not getting my pad. Anyway, and then I was asked to come up with alternatives, and I'm like, okay, the pad doing this, the pad doing that. And then I said, the only way I will accept that there is not a pad on the cover of this book is if, and normally I'm easy to work with, but I was not about this. I was a pain in the ass. And normally, anyways, and I said, the only way I'll accept it is if there's another fiction book that has a maxi pad on the cover. And of course, there's no book, not even books about periods have maxi pads on the cover. So I love it, and thank you to Malcolm, and so a period story. This one's for London. Whenever I hear Christmas carols, I'm reminded of being 12 years old and having my period on the same night we had to go to Victoria Park with the Christian girls group from the United Church to sing in front of the nativity scene, which was missing the baby Jesus because it had been stolen earlier in the week. My friends, I think that keeps happening too. I think that was like a recurring thing that happened. Anyway, my friend Stacy was a member of the church and had been the one who invited me to join the group. It was an important night and we had been practicing for weeks. I'm tone deaf, and all the practicing in the world couldn't help me, so I just mouthed along to the words to avoid making us sound bad, and no one seemed to notice. I had my period earlier than other girls, and for some reason I never took pain medication. I didn't think to tell my mom how bad the cramps were. I just suffered through it. Don't feel bad, Mom. It's not your fault I didn't tell you. But that first year, this is autofiction, by the way. But the first year of my period, the pain was so severe I could hardly stand it. And this evening was no exception. It felt like someone was stabbing me repeatedly in the abdomen as I mouthed the words to Jingle Bells, Silent Night, and O Come All Ye Faithful. At one point in the middle of Jingle Bell Rock, I felt faint and saw stars in front of my eyes. My hands were shaking, and I sweat even though it was cold out. I imagined being taken away in an ambulance and was most concerned, not that I would fall or smash my head, but that everyone would find out I had my period. That was the same night I realized I hated God. Okay, my dream house. So the final section of the book is a constant conflict between the past and the future, who are personified as a variety of different characters. My dream house. The future had bought some land and was building their dream house with their own two hands. Even though the work was difficult and backbreaking, they felt they were up for the challenge because they were considered handy. The past was standing behind the future in yellow overalls and a backwards baseball cap, watching everything the future was trying to do. Every once in a while, the past would cover their mouth in an attempt to control an eruption of giggles. After looking back at the past with a little glare, the future laid down some boards and hammered some nails, trying to ignore the rude and inconsiderate disruption. But the more the future hammered, the more the past giggled into their palm. Eventually, the giggling turned into an outright laugh, and then a high pitched cackle followed by a stream of tears. The future threw down the hammer and stomped over to the past. What's your problem? Why are you laughing like that? The past wiped their face and took in some gulps of badly needed air. I'm laughing, they stammered as another fit of giggles started to bubble to the surface. I'm laughing because when I've finished with you, there's not going to be anything left of this place. So I'll read another one for the past and the future. This one's a little less bleak. This one's called "You Don't Exist." The past, the future, and this is my final piece. The past, the future, and the present were enjoying the hot tub on a cool evening. The past back was sore, and the future was practicing mindfulness. The present looked at them both and frowned. I feel left out when I'm around you two. Here we go, said the past. The future made a soft humming sound to block out the chatter because they had just reached the point where they could divert every thought as it came into their mind. Seriously, said the present, you two are a clique. Have you ever considered, said the past, that you may feel left out because you might not even exist? In fact, you, or rather the concept of you, may be an impossibility. The present shook their head and started to laugh. Hilarious. That's just so funny I could weep. My therapist says it's okay to let go of people who are having a negative impact on your life. And I think he has a point. I have some theories about you, but I wouldn't be so rude to say them to your face. I was telling you how I felt when I'm with you two. I was expressing myself in order to deepen our relationship. You don't need to tell everyone everything you think about them, even if it's going to hurt their feelings. Sorry, but I have an honesty problem, said the past. And when I lie, people see right through me. Would you two knock it off, said the future. I'm trying to meditate and move into a deep state of relaxation. The present shook their head and lifted themselves out of the hot tub. The past watched the present grab a towel and head toward the house. Are you naked? Asked the past. I'm wearing swim trunks, said the future, who looked over at the present's bare ass shining in the moonlight. I am too, said the present, and they laughed together about the present's nakedness. We're awful, howled the past. It's true, cried the future, who laughed so hard they got a stitch in their side. Thank you.
Oh, there's so much I would like to talk about. I hardly know where to start. Let me ask you something kind of specific about language. First of all, both of you, and because this is very different, I find, in your two books. David, I see you using, really being clever with your use of language, creating words, using very unusual words. I had to go to the dictionary a few times, and that never happens, really. So like the language of the poem Fossil Hunting with its crinoids, puzzles, and your invention of rickety split, which is just fantastic. But Kathryn, I find in Kathryn's book, it's really the opposite. It's the language of the
To go to the dictionary.
absolutely not. And as you heard, it really is the language of the everyday. And sometimes with David's poems, you need the title is the only thing that you can really latch onto and say, okay, I'm sure that I know what's happening here in the title. And so I would characterize these two books as, David, I see you using language to destabilize and defamiliarize the reader right from the very beginning. Whereas with Kathryn's book, language makes the reader feel at home and feel comfortable and invites the reader in. And then what happens? The scenes, the characters just utterly destroy that sense of comfort and kind of rip that away from the reader. Excuse me. So I'd just like to ask you about that, about your use of language, and if you see it that way, or how you approach the language that you use in these books.
Smarty pants.
Or say anything else if you don't want to answer that.
That's a really interesting question. I think for me, sometimes what happens is the drafting process is sort of like associative. So language will suggest other words through its sound and rhythm, and that sort of carries. I mean, it's like the sort of another poem that's actually quite near fossil hunting. Broken Watch Jazz talks about the tumble down staircase kick drum to cymbal, and that poem in particular, the language for that I chose for it was trying to capture the energy of a particular jazz show that my wife Teresa and I had gone to in Montreal with the Dunnery Castle Quartet, and who were actually, they were David Bowie's backing band on his last album, Black Star. And it was, I was not expecting to be like having my sort of face melted by this fusion jazz. We were in the front row, and I just like, it's like I have to express this in language somehow, and of course I failed. But that association of sound, I find, is really important in sort of linking words together and coming up with unexpected combinations, I think. I also, I have this thing where I just want it to be such an immediate entry point, and sometimes that's a problem. I remember when I was working with my editor, Jim Johnstone, he'd sometimes be like, well, let's just ease them in, you know, it's okay, you can use an expletive construction here, just ease them in a little bit. And that was really helpful. I think also trying to, it's something that I feel like I'm trying to work on as well, varying different language patterns. So then the poems have different types of identities. So some of them will be more sort of prose poemy, like long range forecast is like a little story. But then something like fossil hunting, my goal was really to just torque language and tighten it as much as possible to give that sense of acceleration. So that's some of the rationale, I think. I can talk about the dream logic stuff as well later, but I think that's a good starting point.
Thanks. Yeah, because some of the poems are, it's like a punch to the face. Right? It's like, oh my God, I don't have no idea where I am. Like walking into a wall that you didn't see coming, and then trying to gather your wits as the poem goes on. It's a worthwhile experience, that's for sure.
Don't let that discourage you from getting the book.
Yeah, no.
Good thing. That's a good thing. I was about to say that'd be a great blurb. That's a great blurb for a certain type of reader. I mean, the thing I think that makes me not a poet is that I don't really think about language. I think in the way poets, most of my poems previously were prose poems, and I'm really just sort of addicted to narrative, and I'm interested in shaping a narrative and the kind of twists and turns and unexpected juxtapositions. And so I just sort of, the voices are kind of in my head and they kind of come on the page. So I don't really pay attention. Most of my attention is on narrative and character, no matter the length of the piece. So.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting question about genre, I think. Because there are pieces, David, I think in Nightlight that would be perfectly at home in form anyway, in Anecdotes. And I know a lot of your books, the two books of poetry that I have read the most, The Saddest Place on Earth and The Purpose Pitch. I mean, these narrative poems, narrative prose poems, but they are poetry and marketed it as poetry. So on the question of genre, like David, first of all, do you see a distinction between them? I mean, you kind of mentioned a sort of narrative poem as standing out, like Balance maybe, or House Band. I think those would feel at home in Kathryn's book. Do you think about that? And Kathryn, what is your sense of genre? I mean, you don't think of yourself as a poet, But I learned a lot from you about what a poem could be that I never thought it could be. And I do things that I think, oh, that's a poem. But you say no. So on genre, what do you think?
That's another great question. It's interesting because in grad school, I was on the fiction train. I was like, I want to, write a story collection, and that ended up being my master's thesis was a story collection, and I wanted to be a novelist. And then I like working hit, and it was harder to sustain. I found the momentum for fiction. But I still am in love with characters and little narratives, and I think that's what actually, attracted me to Kathryn's poetry. The Onion Man, for instance, that book, which is like a verse novel, basically. And I love the skinny little stanzas, just everything about it, the aesthetic on the page. I was really drawn to that, and then also the fact that, well, you have really memorable turns of phrase, but you also then have your characters, and you have a little story that accrues. And I feel like I still like to do that. I like having people in my poems. I like having little characters. Like Balance is a great example. That one was actually drawn from an experience on Dundas Street. If you can, I'm sure you can see why. But yeah, just sort of telling a story and giving readers a little more space, I think, to breathe and inhabit a setting and in a narrative. So I feel like I do. I will sit down sometimes and say I want to write something that is sort of like a sonnet, but breaks it up a little bit. And then I'll say, I want to tell a little story this time. So I feel like I am sort of conscious of that, and sometimes that helps me when I'm stuck. When I'm stuck on a piece, to just do something completely different, and then something comes of that.
Genre is such an afterthought to me, and I consider it as like a categorization for publication. And so I don't really think about it. I just write something. I think probably, if I'm honest, I'm a playwright, although I've never written a play. And but because my screenplays are like plays, and my stories and poems are like plays, and I like dialogue. I write dialogue. So so I just don't really see myself really fitting in a genre, and it's always what can I get away with. So in poetry, seem to be the most accepting of the genres that you could say anything can be a poem, or that's how I teach it, and that was my philosophy. And now I've just taken that attitude with fiction. So so it just I love poetry, I love poets and stuff, but I just don't really feel like I ever identified as one, and I don't really, I just don't, genre just doesn't interest me. And then I'm like, oh, I could send this to this contest, or I could send this out for publication. And that's when I consider genre. So pieces in this book were published as poems and stories.
I know you said autofiction for some of this.
And some of it's autofiction
is
as well.
Is this the narrator who has to memorize on Flanders Fields and hates every moment of it?
Yes.
Yes. Because you certainly wouldn't. I've never seen you write anything like that.
Yeah.
Like poetry in that traditional sense.
Oh yeah. No, I didn't.
Okay, so that for like a sort of darker question about both books. Like I really, in all kinds of ways, I think these two books are about violation. Violations of different kinds and transgressions of different kinds. It can be physical, it can be mental, it can be in a dream and not knowing the difference between dream and reality, or it can be a violation of expectation. And so in the last category, Kathryn, your first story, The Boy is Dead, in the section The Boy is Dead, the story The Boy is Dead, you could perhaps summarize better than I could, but effectively, it's about a boy who dies, no surprise, but at the end, the final paragraph says, well, no, actually, no, there was no boy who died. This story is about me and my family. I've changed some of the details. And so you've got a reader expectation when you enter a story that you can trust what your narrator is telling you, and at the end of the story, no, sorry, actually, everything I told you was not at all the story that that happened, if you can say that as well. In Dark Thoughts, too, the park suddenly talks, and you don't expect something like that. You've got two sets of characters speaking in the park, and suddenly the park jumps in and talks. In Nightlight, in David's book, Dream Logic Rules a fair bit, and here's your chance to talk about that. But it means that the reader, just like when we're dreaming, we don't know we can't predict in any rational way what's going to happen next, or even what's going on. And this is true even for poems that don't seem really to be about dream. The witness statement are our number 2, which is one of the most disturbing things I think I've ever read. I recommend that poem extremely highly for just feeling dislocated and frightened. But so I would ask you, just in general, about the theme of violation and transgression. Is this something that you both had thought about in these books? Because I just found it everywhere, in every possible way that you could think about those 2 words.
Sure, because I had an idea and I don't want to forget it. So one interesting thing is, as I was kind of putting the book together, I said to Malcolm, who is my editor, I'm so grateful for, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, I'm writing about sexual violence and the climate crisis, and some are humorous and some are not. I don't really understand what I'm doing. He's like, I think there might be a connection between those 2 things. And once he said that, I was like, oh, yes, of course. Male violence and the degradation of the planet makes perfect sense. And sort of once that locked in, that kind of informed the collection. So the 4 sections are in different parts, but they're kind of all speaking to one another. But that's what's really informing my writing all the way through.
So tied together different kinds.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I find that in my drafting process, the engine of many of my poems is anxiety, and
that could be another whole question for both of you. Absolutely.
Yes, and what I find interesting is that the premise of a dream. I don't write dream poems where I document my dreams and replicate them as exactly as I had. So it's like a document of my dream. I start with dream as premise. That's how I start, and then create a narrative that follows that dream logic, usually in the present tense as well. So then it's not about a dream that you had, it's like being in a dream. And for me, what I've found is that has allowed me to write about things that I would not otherwise have written about. And I've surprised myself sometimes in directions that they go and things that I never, again, would have consciously decided to write about. I'm really glad you also mentioned the titling, the fact that there are a whole bunch of poems that are not titled as dream poems. But what I like about that is that the dream poems sort of rub against those ones and make you question the reality of them. And then in the dream poems, I feel like there are moments of reality that sort of push through the weirder elements. And so I like that. I think that all of them are dream poems, and none of them are dream poems in some ways. Another thing that I'm trying to do is to find engines for my poetry that are not anxiety, and there are a couple of poems that do that. I think, at least, or I hope, in the book. One is "This Night Walk Holds Everything," which is basically it's like a love poem, and it's about 2 people really vividly enjoying the world together. And I feel like, I don't know if that came through, but for me, what I love about that poem is that the push and pull has to do with the way that the 2 speakers interact. And I like doing that too, or trying to, because I feel like I'm a positive person, and I'm more optimistic than not. I think, absolutely. So yeah, I think having that tension, it helps.
Okay, I'll ask one more kind of question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. We started a bit late, and there's nothing And this is really the question about the darkness and the light, I guess, in the two books. I find that Anecdotes is asking readers to consider how meaningful the concerns of their daily lives really are, while at the same time suggesting that their daily lives just have threats that aren't recognized. I mean, it's a mix of things. And Nightlight, it suggests a darkness and an uncertainty at the edges of everything, kind of just out of sight, just beyond that door. And I think readers will feel uncomfortable reading both of these books at times, if not a stronger word than that, like upset about life. But then there are moments of real hope in both as well. And in Kathryn's, in Anecdotes, there's a piece called Wipeout about a 5-year-old who's learning to skate. The narrator is watching this girl learning to skate, and the girl falls and falls, and this is really distressing for the narrator at first. But then the girl falls and falls and falls and keeps getting up, and the narrator finally takes this as a very positive thing, that this young girl just can't be beaten. And Nightlight, where you talked about the sudden night walk, and there's that moment where the two brothers are whispering at night, and their words are kind of going out the window and becoming balloons or bits of the moon out over the backyard. There's just these beautiful light moments as well. So the last question is, in an ideal world, I guess, which you both make it clear, I think, that we're not in at this moment. But in an ideal world, what would readers take away from Nightlight and from Anecdotes? What would you have someone walk away thinking or feeling?
Yeah, I mean, my interest would be, I don't know, it's hard to say. Well, one thing is that particularly for, women kind of coming of age the time I did in the 80s and 90s, just the kind of shared experience of repetitive male violence that often went unacknowledged. So that shared experience, and then also in relation to the climate crisis and all forms of oppression that we witness and are witnessing, to maybe do something and to maybe care about people who aren't you, and to care about things that you think might not affect you. So those are kind of the two things I'm most interested in.
Just, Kathryn, about your work, I think when I read your work, I feel like the dark places that it takes you, for me, it's not pessimistic. For me, the reason why is because even in the darkest moments, the reason why it's dark is because there is something of value that has been lost or taken away. And to me, you do a really good job of navigating those two areas. So I don't, I feel positive coming out of your work. And it's sort of like you guide us through these things, and you're a very good guide. So I think that maybe that's something that I aspire to as well with my book, where it does. I would like readers to take away that sort of sense of guiding, where we go places. It's sort of structured where it starts out a little lighter and it gets really weird in the middle. But then the last section for me, with poems like the poem about the two brothers, which was one of my favorites to write. The final section, at least from my perspective, is like guiding you out, lifting you up. So then there's a sense of optimism and possibility, the sense that through creativity there's possibility. Yeah. So I think that's what I would like you to take from my book.
Thank you. Do we have a few minutes for questions from the audience? Anybody have any questions? I think they're running a microphone to you, so just hang on till you get one of them.
Thank you. Here's a question I asked of Joel Fafak, and it's a simple question, and for both of you. Who wins the war between poetry and artificial intelligence?
You don't want my answer. We're done for before that. That's my answer.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And Dave Montour. Yeah, great question, Dave. For me, it's the again. I guess when I was going to say, going back to the experience of the book as object and having this book that someone has written and editors have created and publishers have put all this work into. To me, that was going to be the answer, but I don't know. Or is AI going to? I guess they're making books.
I'm not really. There are other things that are sort of preoccupying me. I know a lot of writers are concerned about AI, but I think our attention. I mean, I think it's serious. I'm trying to keep up with it. But I'm just not. If people start writing AI poems, like what, I don't really care. Like if that's how you're going to experience humanity, then go ahead. But the world is in deep trouble, and so I don't really care about AI. It's probably part of it, and it's participating in our continual dehumanization. But I haven't let it preoccupy me right now. So, but I know a lot of other writers are concerned about it.
That's a good point, and I think as well. I find myself following the careers of writers who were doing great things before AI came around, like people that I've come to know through their work, or at readings or in other places. And to me, that's what interests me, is following those people and their work. And I know that AI can't replicate that. They can't replicate that voice and those perspectives and that evolution. I think they're these great authors' points of view.
I think I wrote an AI poem once.
I remember you.
I did. I
remember
was playing with this online Ouija. I'm assuming that's like a precursor. And I would ask it a question and it would give me the answer back, and that was my poem.
I remember
I'm an
you
AI
posting some of
poet.
those, on social media. I remember also at a New Year's Eve party trolling Siri and just like asking really ridiculous questions, and I feel like Siri's going to remember all that. At a friend's house, trolling Siri, and it's like, oh man, when the robot revolution comes, they're not going to forget that.
Anybody else? Maybe one more question? I got a quick one. David, what came first, your recurrent dreams or Bob Dylan's 115th dream? Because that was always running through my mind as I read everything in Nightlight.
That's interesting. Yes, they coexist. they coexist. They're all part of the web. Yeah.
Right. Anyone, any questions? Or could you join me then in thanking David and Kathryn?